You know how betrayal doesn't always come with a knife in the back? Sometimes it walks in wearing heels, sips your coffee, and takes your job with a smile. It was a Thursday morning in Seattle. Gray skies, steady drizzle, the kind of weather that makes you feel like the universe is trying to apologize in advance. I had just finished leading a morning strategy call, still riding high off our latest product launch, when Benjamin Andover knocked once on my office door and walked in like he owned the place. Technically, he didn't. I looked up, expecting the usual awkward small talk or a quick update before his next board call. Instead, he folded his hands neatly in front of him and said, "You've got 30 minutes to clear out." No explanation, no warning, just like that. My first thought wasn't panic. It wasn't even rage. It was, so it's finally happening. I blinked once, twice. "I'm sorry?" He didn't flinch. "The board has decided to restructure. Reagan will be taking over your role, effective immediately." Reagan, my cousin, the same Reagan who dropped out of 2 colleges, spent 5 years bouncing between wellness retreats and startup ideas that never survived a second pitch meeting. Reagan, who'd only joined Andover Tech 6 weeks ago in a so-called advisory position, whatever the hell that meant. I stood slowly, watching him like he might crack a smile and admit it was some sick corporate prank. But Benjamin just looked bored, like he was waiting for me to cry or scream or beg. I didn't. Instead, I walked to the shelf behind my desk and pulled down the frame that held my Team Leader of the Year award. The glass was cool in my hands. My reflection looked calm, collected. "Is there a reason for this decision?" I asked. He shrugged. "We need someone who aligns better with the company's culture." I knew exactly what that meant. Someone easier to control. Someone who wouldn't question why the budget was leaking into shell vendors tied to Benjamin's golf buddies. Someone who wouldn't notice HR complaints mysteriously disappearing. And Reagan? She was perfect for that. Pretty, pliable, and family. I placed the award gently into the cardboard box on my desk, followed it with the framed $20 million Series B check, a signed photo from our first major IPO pitch, and the origami crane my old intern made me the day I gave her her first bonus. "Don't forget your badge," Benjamin added. His tone shifted, more smug now. "Security protocol. You know how it is. We can't take chances." I slid the badge off my lapel and handed it to him. "Of course, though, someone might want to revisit the lease clause we renegotiated last quarter. I believe Marlowe Ventures sent a notice yesterday." He waved a dismissive hand. "Reagan can handle it." I almost laughed. Of course he didn't know. He didn't know that Marlowe Ventures was mine, that I'd founded it under a trust using the inheritance my grandmother left me, that I'd quietly bought this building 4 years ago and offered Andover Tech a sweetheart lease to keep them happy while keeping my name out of it entirely. He didn't know that the clause I mentioned was custom written by my attorney, Naomi, and stated clearly, "Any tenant found guilty of wrongful dismissal related to nepotism or ethical violations may be evicted within 24 hours." I nodded once and walked toward the elevator. My box felt heavier with each step, but not from the weight of the contents. It was the gravity of what was coming next. In the lobby, Reagan was already waiting with Elaine Andover, Benjamin's wife and my aunt by blood, though that word had lost all meaning years ago. Elaine wore her signature pearls and that tired, forced smile she always gave me, the one that said, "You'll never quite belong." "I'm glad you're clearing out early," she said, sipping her overpriced latte. "Reagan wants to rebrand the entire floor. Your design choices were a little cold." Reagan beamed, perfectly poised in a soft pink blazer and a fresh blowout. "I'll take care of things, Maddie. Promise." I smiled thinly. "Just like you took care of the board vote?" Her smile faltered for half a second. "Don't be so dramatic. This is just business." Just business. That was the same phrase my parents used when they drained my college fund to bail Reagan out of her credit card debt. The same thing they told me when they insisted I share my apartment with her just for a month after she blew through her last job. The same line I got when they called this morning, just before Benjamin walked in, to say I should be happy for Reagan's big break and not make this harder than it needs to be. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button. Just business. My phone buzzed the moment the doors closed. Naomi. Eviction notice prepped. Say the word. I typed back. Not yet. Let them celebrate first. As the elevator descended, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall. I didn't see a defeated woman. I saw something sharper, more focused. I saw someone ready. They thought they'd buried me, fired me, replaced me. They didn't realize they'd just kicked their entire company off my property. And tomorrow morning, Benjamin, Elaine, and Reagan would find out exactly what that meant. I stepped into the rain-soaked street, lifted my face to the sky, and smiled. Let the storm come. I'd been building an ark. I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly through the damp streets of Capitol Hill, headlights bleeding through the mist like questions without answers. My windshield wipers kept time with the dull ache building in my chest. But I didn't cry. I never cry in public. Instead, I parked in front of my favorite all-night diner on 12th and ordered a black coffee I wouldn't drink. It was habit more than hunger, ritual more than need. I needed space to think, to breathe, and more importantly, to start the clock. I slid into the booth in the far back corner, the one with the cracked leather and the view of the rain-streaked alley. My laptop blinked open, casting a cold blue glow across the Formica table. One by one, I opened the folders I had organized and color-coded over the past 18 months. They weren't files about work performance or quarterly reports. No, these were personal, strategic, surgical, emails, screenshots, time-stamped Slack messages, internal HR complaints that mysteriously vanished after informal discussions with upper management. I had copies of everything, backed up to 3 cloud drives and 2 encrypted hard copies. I wasn't just keeping receipts. I was building a war chest. Because the truth is, I knew this was coming. The first time Reagan waltzed into the office in her Chanel sneakers, 2 weeks into her so-called consulting role, I felt it. The way Benjamin's tone shifted around her. The way Elaine began dropping by for unannounced lunches. The way people stopped looking me in the eye during meetings. It was slow at first. Whispers, meetings I wasn't invited to, projects quietly reassigned. But I noticed. I always notice. So I got to work. 6 months ago, I updated the lease for Andover Tech's headquarters, my building, remember, with 2 new clauses. One required quarterly ethics compliance disclosures. The other allowed for emergency lease termination with less than 24 hours notice in cases of proven discriminatory practices or nepotism. Benjamin signed it himself. He didn't even read it. The ink had barely dried before I started consulting with Naomi, my lawyer. She was brilliant, former DOJ with a memory like a steel trap and a thirst for corporate accountability that rivaled mine. We built the plan piece by piece. I transferred Marlowe Ventures into a blind trust, set up dummy shell companies to keep my name off any surface-level paperwork, and began documenting everything that happened inside Andover Tech. Every hostile interaction, every skipped promotion, every time I was talked over in meetings or excluded from decisions about projects I had started. Each insult was added to the ledger. I didn't react. I didn't fight back. That's what they expected. I played the role they cast for me. Quiet, loyal, hardworking. Overlooked. Because when people think you're weak, they stop being careful. I kept going to work. I stayed late. I smiled in meetings. And behind the scenes, I built my case. But no matter how calculated I was, It didn't mean I wasn't hurting. You don't spend 4 years building something just to be told you're disposable. You don't give your nights, your holidays, your sanity, only to be replaced by someone who never earned it, never bled for it. And you don't get used to the sting of betrayal, even if you saw it coming. That night in the diner, I opened the folder labeled Red Line. Inside was the draft press release Naomi and I had written months ago, just in case. The subject line read, Marlowe Ventures terminates lease with Andover Tech over ethical violations. Below it, bullet-pointed like a checklist, were the allegations: wrongful termination without due process, nepotism in executive appointments, suppression of internal whistleblower reports, breach of ethics compliance under Lease Clause 9B, all backed by evidence. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even want revenge. I wanted accountability, and I wanted it clean. No anonymous blog posts, no dramatic social media rants, just cold documented facts and the force of the law behind them. I checked the time, midnight. That meant I had exactly 9 hours before the legal notice would be hand-delivered to Andover Tech's front desk. 9 hours before the access codes changed. 9 hours before Benjamin realized the office he ruled like a king was already slipping from his grip. I closed the laptop, finished the now cold coffee, and left a 20 on the table. Outside, the air was heavier than before, thick with mist and tension. I didn't mind. I'd always done my best thinking in the dark. Back at home, I sat in my office, more functional than flashy, tucked into the second bedroom of my townhouse. On the wall above my desk hung the original deed to the building. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the embossed letters with my eyes like scripture. I thought of my grandmother, how she used to say, "Don't waste time proving your worth to people too small to see it. Just make sure they can't ignore you when the ground shifts beneath them." I turned on my desk lamp and began writing my final email. It was addressed to every Andover Tech employee, current and former, whose complaints had gone unanswered, whose voices had been silenced, whose talent had been overlooked. Tomorrow I would let them know that someone had been watching, that someone remembered, that justice was coming, and not in whispers, but with paperwork, signatures, and locked doors. I signed off with my initials, MC. They wouldn't see it coming, but they'd damn sure remember it when it hit. By morning, the world looked the same. Rain clung to the windows. Traffic buzzed like white noise. Andover Tech's headquarters still stood tall. Sleek glass, steel edges, the illusion of power intact. But beneath its polished facade, the foundation had already begun to rot. I arrived at 8:30 a.m., parked across the street in a black sedan I'd rented just for the occasion. Nothing flashy, just clean enough to be ignored. I sat behind tinted glass, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the slow unraveling begin. Employees filtered in like it was any other workday, keycards in hand, greetings exchanged at the revolving doors. Laughter, lattes, the comfort of routine. They had no idea what was coming. At 8:45, Benjamin's Audi pulled up like clockwork. He stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his Brioni suit with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world. He didn't glance at the building, just strolled toward it like it belonged to him. Seconds later, Reagan's rose gold Tesla rolled to a stop behind him. She emerged looking like she'd walked off a Forbes cover shoot. Blush silk blouse, high-waisted trousers, nude heels clicking with every step. Her hair was perfectly styled. Makeup just enough to say I woke up like this. They paused at the front, waiting for the glass doors to slide open. They didn't. I watched as Benjamin frowned, swiped his badge again. Nothing. He knocked. The security guard inside said something and held up a piece of paper. Benjamin's face changed instantly. Confusion, then disbelief. He motioned to Reagan, who stepped closer. her mouth forming rapid questions I couldn't hear from my car. The guard handed Benjamin an envelope. The eviction notice, signed, stamped, effective immediately. Reagan's mouth dropped. She looked around, realizing people had stopped to watch. Phones were coming out. Someone had started recording. Benjamin's expression tightened as he scanned the document. His lips moved fast, demanding, accusing. The guard shook his head and pointed to the clause at the bottom. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. My phone buzzed. Naomi. Delivery confirmed. Access codes changed. Lockdown complete. I typed 2 words. Perfect timing. By 9:02, the sidewalk outside the building was chaos. Employees stood in clumps, murmuring. Reagan was on her phone, pacing, her designer heels sliding slightly on the wet pavement. Elaine appeared a few minutes later in a tailored ivory coat, flustered and fuming, trying to mask her discomfort with authority. From my car, I watched the ripples form. First confusion, then panic. And then came the fury. Benjamin stormed out from the front. The notice crumpled in his fist. He looked around like a man searching for someone to blame, someone to yell at. And then he saw me. It took him a second, 2, maybe, before recognition settled in. His eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. He marched across the street, rain slicking his hair back. "You!" he growled, stopping at the edge of my car. "Marlowe Ventures? It's you?" I stepped out, calm as ever, folder in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Andover," I said, as if we were old friends bumping into each other at brunch. "I see you've received our notice." "This is a mistake," he spat. "You can't do this. You don't have the authority." I flipped open the folder and held it out. Clause 9B, signed and notarized. Any tenant engaging in ethical violations, such as nepotism, retaliatory firing, or hostile work environments, is subject to immediate termination of lease. He snatched the document from my hand and scanned the highlighted section. "You think this is going to hold up in court?" he barked. "We'll sue. I'll bury you in litigation." "I hope you do," I said smoothly, "because then I get to submit everything we've documented, including those vendor kickbacks, and that lovely expense account you rerouted through your brother-in-law's consulting firm." His face blanched. Reagan ran up behind him, her eyes wide. "Maddie, this is insane. You're doing this to family?" Family. That word again. "You mean like when you told the board I was emotionally unstable?" I asked quietly. "Or when you fabricated complaints to HR to paint me as unfit to lead?" Elaine joined them, voice sharp. "This is petty, Madison. You're throwing away your reputation over a personal grudge." "No," I said. "I'm reclaiming it." A crowd had formed, employees, passers-by, cameras. Whispers swirled around us. Benjamin turned red. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I said, "the day I trusted any of you." Reagan reached out, eyes glassy now. "You don't have to do this. We can talk, maybe even fix things." I stepped back. "You wanted my office. You've got it. Just not the building it's in." Then I pointed behind them, where movers had begun arriving. Uniformed, efficient. Boxes stacked high on dollies. "You have 24 hours to vacate. Anything left behind will be treated as abandoned property. That includes the espresso machine." Elaine gasped. Benjamin fumed. Reagan looked like a balloon slowly deflating, but I wasn't done. I pulled a second document from my folder. "And just so we're clear, this isn't just an eviction. This is formal notification of pending legal action, wrongful termination, defamation, discrimination, the works." Benjamin's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Reagan?" She looked up, her voice small. "Yeah?" Good luck finding a job in the city. My lawyers already sent a courtesy package to every major firm. Transparency is key in tech these days. I walked away without looking back. Behind me, I heard Benjamin cursing, Elaine pleading, Reagan crying. The arrogant had fallen, the untouchables had been touched, and I hadn't even begun the real cleanup yet. I watched them scramble from Naomi's office on the 12th floor of the building across the street. The view was perfect. Wide windows overlooking the exact spot where Benjamin had once parked like a king arriving at his throne. Now, movers wheeled crates past him while he stood slack-jawed in the drizzle. Phone pressed so tightly to his ear, it looked like he might crush it. Inside Naomi's conference room, the energy was electric. My legal team was in full swing, handling media inquiries, processing subpoenas, preparing deposition schedules. Naomi stood at the center, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, flipping through binders like a surgeon prepping for the first incision. I hadn't said much. I didn't need to. Every moment, every move had already been decided. This was a takedown by design. At 10:17 a.m., our PR agency released the statement we'd drafted months ago, a clean, unflinching press release that laid out every infraction backed by verifiable facts and time-stamped evidence. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was precise, clinical. By noon, half the tech blogs in the Pacific Northwest were running headlines. Andover Tech faces lease termination over ethics breach. Former VP Madison Clark spearheads unprecedented eviction of tech firm. Nepotism, lies, and lost offices. Inside Seattle's most brutal corporate breakup. That one made me smile. At 1:00 p.m., Benjamin tried to hold a press conference in front of the building. I watched it from Naomi's iPad, sound muted. He stood behind a flimsy podium with a soggy banner taped to it, flanked by Reagan and Elaine, both trying and failing to look unbothered. But no amount of spin could salvage what was happening. Because while he spoke, reporters were already quoting internal emails I had just unsealed, including one where Elaine suggested that removing me would reset the masculine energy of the boardroom. That one hit Twitter like wildfire. By 2:45, their attorney called to request a private conversation. I declined. That evening, I returned to the office that had once been mine. The movers had just finished clearing out Reagan's half-hung mood boards and leftover boxes labeled Vision Strategy in gold Sharpie. I stood in the doorway, the lights dimmed, breathing in the stillness of a space finally mine again. Not by job title, but by ownership. I'd kept the original furniture, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what had been taken from me and what I'd reclaimed. The city lights flickered outside. Seattle buzzed below. But up here, it was quiet, until my phone buzzed. Mom, what you're doing to your cousin is cruel. She's family. Dad, we raised you to be better than this. Reagan, you've destroyed everything. I hope it was worth it. I stared at the screen, heart steady. These were the same people who had once told me I was too ambitious, too sharp, too intense. They'd always asked me to shrink so Reagan could shine, but I wasn't interested in shrinking anymore. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. There were still contracts to finalize. New tenants lined up for the building. Startups run by women. First-generation founders. Teams that reminded me of who I was 10 years ago when I walked into a boardroom and waited for someone to take me seriously. They wouldn't have to wait now. I sent the approval to Naomi. Move forward with new leases, clear background, lock in terms. Then I clicked into the shared drive labeled Evidence Legal Proceedings. There, tucked in digital folders, lived every recording, document, and signature we'd archived. My insurance policy. I wasn't naive. Benjamin would fight back, maybe with lawyers, maybe through whispers in rooms I no longer entered. But I didn't need those rooms anymore. Because while he was playing chess on a single board, I had already built the entire arena. At 7 p.m., Naomi called. "Naomi, investor fallout started," she said, barely hiding the satisfaction in her voice. 3 major backers just pulled funding, and the board? They're requesting an emergency review. Apparently they had no idea Reagan was tied to Elaine. "Of course they didn't," I said. "Elaine was very careful about her puppeteering. They're asking if you'd be open to coming back in some capacity." I laughed, short and sharp. "They had their chance." "Thought you'd say that. I told them no." "Good." I paused. "Let them rebuild from the ashes." "If they can." Before we hung up, she added, "Madison? Yeah? You did this without raising your voice once." "I didn't have to," I said. "I let the facts speak for me." Later that night, I stood at the top of the building, rooftop access, locked and private. I leaned against the ledge, watching the city glow. The sky still overcast, but clear of rain for once. They had called me calculated, cold, difficult. Maybe I was, but I wasn't cruel. Cruel would have been letting them walk all over me again. Cruel would have been staying silent. Instead, I chose clarity. Instead, I chose consequences. I stayed up late that night drafting a letter. Not for Benjamin, not for the board, not even for Reagan. For every woman who's ever been asked to dim her fire so someone else could shine. For every voice that was silenced under the guise of professionalism. For every loyalty that was weaponized. Tomorrow, the world would know exactly who I was. Not a pawn, not a placeholder, not someone's safety net. I was the storm they didn't see coming. The sun rose over Seattle the next morning like nothing had happened. As if an empire hadn't crumbled overnight. As if the people who once ruled from glass towers weren't now unpacking cardboard boxes in temporary offices across town. I drove by the old building around 8 a.m., not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see it. Quiet, stripped of logos, its name no longer gleaming above the entrance. The lobby, once buzzing with polished suits and PR smiles, stood hollow. The security guards nodded at me now, not as an outsider, but with recognition. Respect. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhale. By noon, news outlets had picked up the deeper story. Not just the eviction, not just the ethics scandal, but the woman behind it. The quiet one, the one they pushed out, the one who owned the floor beneath their designer shoes. Madison Clark, from executive to enforcer. She was fired, then she evicted the entire company. Seattle's silent power player breaks her silence. My inbox was flooded. Former employees, reporters, law firms, a few investment offers I hadn't expected, but also strangers, women from across the country, messages that began with "thank you." I spent the afternoon in a coffee shop downtown, tucked near the window with a chamomile tea I barely touched, scrolling through them. I was pushed out of my job last year after training my male replacement. Watching you take control gave me back something I lost. You made me believe quiet power still matters, that we don't always have to scream to be heard. You didn't just burn the bridge, you built a better one. That one stopped me. I read it twice, and for the first time since this all began, my chest ached, not from anger, but from the weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The years of being overlooked, undervalued, strategically minimized so someone less threatening could shine. I didn't just win, I'd exposed something deeper. Later that night, I met my grandmother for dinner. She chose the place. A cozy, no-frills restaurant in Ballard she used to take me to when I was a teenager, too ambitious for my own good. She was already seated when I walked in, a sparkle in her eyes that told me she already knew. "I saw the news," she said, setting down her glass of wine. "You looked taller on camera." I laughed. I think it was the heels. No, she said. You've always been tall. You just stopped shrinking for other people. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. About my grandfather, who had invested in rundown buildings the world forgot. About how she used to take me to zoning meetings just to show me how decisions were really made. Before I left, she reached into her purse and handed me a thin leather notebook, my grandfather's. The pages were worn, margins filled with tiny loops of notes. In one entry, dated August 3, 2002, I found this. Madison asked why I buy land no one wants. I told her it's not about what's there. It's about what could be. She didn't blink. That girl's going to build an empire no one sees coming. I closed the notebook and swallowed hard. He saw me before anyone else did. When I got home, the house was quiet. Safe. Mine. I changed into sweats, pulled my hair into a bun, and sat at my desk. Not to work, but to breathe. My phone lit up. Reagan. I moved out today. Can't get a call back from anywhere. I guess I just didn't think it would end like this. I stared at the message for a long time. I could have ignored it. I could have said something cutting, final, damning. But I didn't. Instead, I typed, "Actions have echoes. Maybe now you'll start listening to your own." I never heard back. The next morning, I signed a lease with a startup run by 3 Black women building sustainable tech for low-income communities. They'd been priced out of 2 other locations and almost gave up. I gave them the same floor Reagan once redesigned in pastel tones and fake positivity. They cried in my office. I did too. Quietly. You see, this was never about revenge. It was about restoring balance. They stole from me my dignity, my labor, my years. But what they didn't take was my voice. And once I used it, everything shifted. So here I am. Not at the top of a corporate ladder someone else built. Not in a corner office handed to me for my last name, but on solid ground because I own it. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been silenced, shoved aside, told to be a team player while someone else stole your credit, then hear me now. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. And you do not owe anyone your silence. Stand your ground. Speak your truth. And if you've got a story like mine, I want to hear it. Have you ever been underestimated? Ever had to rebuild after someone tried to erase you? Tell me. Share it in the comments. Let's remind each other that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And when it does, the world listens.